You weren't betrayed by an enemy. You were betrayed by something softer. A gentle smile, a warm gaze, a kind word spoken at exactly the moment you needed comfort the most. And you believed it, because the world raised you on a lie. It told you that if you were kind enough, patient enough, good enough, the world would respond in kind. It told you that love means honesty, that vulnerability creates loyalty, that being real means being rewarded. But now you're sitting with the aftermath, a heart picked apart by people who smiled as they took, a mind bruised not by fists, but by silence, by disappointment, by erosion. You're not stupid. You were trained to believe that sincerity guarantees safety, that if your intentions were pure, you couldn't lose. But you did, because you never learned the rule Machiavelli taught 500 years ago. Men are driven not by goodness, but by necessity. They don't stay because they love you. They stay because it's convenient. They stay because you don't question, because your silence makes it easier. And when they've taken all they can, they vanish quietly without warning, without apology, leaving you to wonder if your kindness was a mistake, if your warmth was weakness, if maybe, just maybe, you were too soft for a world this sharp. Let me be clear, this is not a video for comfort seekers. This is not another be your best self monologue. This is war, a war fought in silence, a war you didn't even realize you were losing. For those who've been drained by being too available, too forgiving, too easy to reach, and even easier to read. If you've ever asked yourself, why do the manipulators always win? Why do the good ones always end up bleeding? Why does giving everything get me nothing? Then stop right now and look again, not with the eyes of a dreamer, but through the mind of a strategist. Because here we don't teach you how to be softer. We teach you how to be sharper, more dangerous without ever raising your voice. It begins by unlearning the oldest lie you've ever swallowed, that goodness guarantees protection. It doesn't. What protects you is presence, perception, and power. Now ask yourself, are you ready to take it back? It doesn't bruise, it doesn't bleed, but it breaks something deep inside you quietly. It's the kind of pain that doesn't scream because it was never allowed to. It whispers, it festers. It grows in silence because you were taught to call it strength. They look at you calm, composed, reasonable, and assume you're untouched, untouchable. They see your patience and call it wisdom. They see your forgiveness and call it virtue. They see your stillness and assume you're at peace. But what they don't see, what they'll never see, is what it cost you to stay that still. Because the truth is, you've been touched more times than you dare to admit, not by violence, but by erosion. By people who leaned on your empathy until they drained it. By those who took your compassion as permission. By those who mistook your loyalty for blindness. And the worst part, you let them. Not because you were weak, but because you were hopeful. You believed they would change. That if you stayed soft, they'd eventually soften too. You thought kindness would protect you. That understanding would earn you peace. That if you just kept showing up, someone someday would show up for you. But no one did. And still you stayed. Because that's what you were taught. Stay kind, stay good, stay available even when it hurts. Even when it kills you slowly. And so you shrunk. You quieted your needs. You became the easy one. The peacekeeper, the forgiver. The one who never asked for too much. The one who stayed even when no one noticed you were slipping. And the world applauded. They called you mature, wise beyond your years. But what they really meant was you're convenient. You don't make us uncomfortable. They praised your endurance not because it was noble, but because it let them off the hook. And so you carried their pain and buried your own. You called it strength, but deep down you knew something was dying. Because real strength is not in being silent. It's in being clear. It's not in staying when it hurts, but in knowing when to walk away. Machiavelli would have told you the truth. He'd say, if your silence keeps the peace but costs you your soul, it is not virtue, it is surrender. And how many times have you surrendered? Not in battle, but in the everyday betrayals of yourself, in the conversations where your truth sat burning on your tongue and you swallowed it, in the relationships where you knew the pattern but chose to stay predictable. And why? Because you were afraid of being too much, afraid of the silence that might follow your boundaries, afraid of looking like the villain in someone else's story. But let me ask you something. Who's been the villain in yours? Who benefited from the version of you that never fought back? Who rewrote your story by rewarding your compliance with temporary peace? Here's the bitter truth. You've been bleeding quietly and calling it strength. But bleeding is not strength. It's a signal, a warning, a red flag that you've ignored long enough. You think if you just keep enduring it, will get better. But endurance without recognition is not love. It's erasure. And you deserve more than being erased in someone else's comfort. So this This is your permission to stop performing peace for people who thrive on your silence, to stop shrinking so others feel tall, to stop mistaking availability for virtue. Let them say you've changed. Let them call you distant, cold, unrecognizable. That's what people say when they lose access to the version of you that never said no. You are not their mirror anymore, not their comfort, not their emotional sponge. You are something else now, something heavier, sharper, keener, but unbreakable. You are sovereign, and this is only the beginning. You thought it was your fault that maybe you were just too trusting, too soft. And this is only the beginning. You thought it was your fault that maybe you were just too trusting, too soft, too available, too much of something, and not enough of something else. But what if I told you it wasn't just you? What if I told you that this wasn't random, but engineered? You were conditioned to lose, not through violence, but through emotional architecture, a system that exploits the very traits you were praised for. Let's get something straight. You weren't born soft. You were trained to be from the moment you could speak. You were rewarded for being agreeable, for smiling when it hurt, for staying quiet when something felt wrong, for saying yes when every cell in your body screamed no. And every time you complied, you were told, "Good job." That's maturity. That's how you get along. What they were really saying was, that's how you make yourself easy to manage. You were programmed to believe that comfort equals connection, that pleasing others means you'll be protected, that being liked is safer than being respected. And so your nervous system adapted. It memorized a rule no one said out loud. Don't make things difficult. So now you flinch at confrontation. You apologize for your tone even when you didn't say anything wrong. You explain yourself again and again, hoping to be understood. That's not personality. That's programming. And the world, it doesn't just tolerate that programming. It feeds on it. Look around. We glorify self-sacrifice. We romanticize being the bigger person. We praise those who give endlessly and abandon them the moment they need something back. You think they love your goodness, but what they love is your predictability. Because here's what Machiavelli knew, long before modern psychology gave it a name. He who reveals his intentions has already surrendered. In other words, transparency is currency, and you've been giving it away cheaply. Every time you explain your pain hoping for compassion, every time you justify your standards to avoid being called difficult, every time you tell someone where you're going emotionally, you're giving them a map. And maps are for people who want to find you, but also for people who want to corner you. Not everyone who mirrors your feelings is trying to connect. Some are trying to read, to measure, to plan. Because if they can predict you, they can move you. And if they can move you, they can use you. This is not always malicious. Sometimes it's subconscious. People gravitate toward what they can control, even if they call it love. And when they've learned your pattern, they test it. They push, they pull, they vanish and reappear just enough to keep you guessing. And the worst part, you stay. You stay because you want to believe it's real. Because you were taught to see the good, even while being drained by the bad. But here's what no one ever told you. Clarity is not cruelty. Boundaries are not betrayal. And being unreadable is protection. You've spent years trying to be understood. Now it's time to become unpredictable. Not to deceive, but to defend. Because when no one can read you, no one can script you, no one can bait you, no one can play a game you didn't agree to play. This is the hidden machinery behind your suffering. You were trained to believe that vulnerability is always connection. But in the wrong hands, vulnerability is leverage. So what now? You unplug the machine. You stop narrating your healing. You stop giving people the user manual to your heart. You stop believing that exposure equals intimacy. You move with intent. You speak with restraint. You become unreadable, not because you're hiding, but because you finally stopped leaking power. Machiavelli didn't advocate cruelty. He advocated control, presence, mystery, strategic silence. Because true power isn't about how loudly you speak. It's about how carefully you're listened to even when you say nothing. So let them guess. Let them wonder. Let them say you've changed. They're right. Because now you're no longer a pattern. You're no longer a map. You're a storm shifting, silent, and sovereign.